show you how to improve a movement that I think every runner should be progressing and working towards, and that is the single leg squat. The single leg squat is a great movement, whether you're strength training, working on mobility or stability, because it works on ankle mobility and stability in that single leg position. It also works on your big toe stability because you have to balance on one leg, which means you have to push your big toe into the ground to work on your balance. It works on hip mobility because you have to get deep in that squat, hip stability, trunk and pelvis stability as well, including single leg control because we don't want your knee going in and out. So today I'm going to show you 3 exercises and movements that you can do to improve your single leg squat, because if your single leg squat doesn't look great, if you're falling all over the place, your hip is dipping, your knee is caving in, or it's wobbly, your ankle's wobbly, you're going to have that carryover when you're running, which means every time that your foot hits the ground, the other leg's swinging through, that stance leg isn't going to be as strong and stable as it could be, which is why you should be working on a single leg squat. So let's go through 3 movements that you should be doing throughout your week. The first movement is to improve ankle mobility, specifically into ankle dorsiflexion. As you squat down, your knee is going over that ankle, which means it's going into closed chain dorsiflexion. So if your ankle is tight, you're not going to be able to get as low into that single leg squat. You could always elevate your heels so you can get deeper to avoid that ankle dorsiflexion if it's stiff, which is a great alternative, but let's also work on improving it just because you do need ankle dorsiflexion when you're running and walking and it's very functional. So go ahead and place that resistance band around your ankle, and then I just have it anchored on my other foot, and all I'm going to do here, keeping my heel on the ground, I'm just going to bring my knee over my toes, leaning forward, making sure I'm not lifting that heel up because I want it to stay down. So I'm just flowing through this motion. Try not to hold it for super long, maybe just a couple seconds. Really working on loosening up that ankle. If you have chronic ankle sprains, it might be a little stiff. If you were in a boot, it might be a little stiff. If you have knee pain or a history of foot and ankle pain, it also might be a little stiff. So I would say do this exercise for about a minute as you flow in and out of it, and you can always compare the side that is not as strong with your single leg squat to the side that's a little bit stronger, or do it on both sides. The next movement that we're going to work on is our hip internal rotation. As you squat down in a single leg squat, your hip is going into hip flexion and hip internal rotation. If it cannot get into hip internal rotation, if it's stiff, you might be hiking your hip up or leaning forward just because you can't get deeper in that hip mobility. So what you're going to do, place one knee on the ground, other knee and foot are facing out to the side. I'm going to tuck my back foot, my back toes, and hands on your hips, and then lean your butt back. So hinge it back toward your heel and come back up. Again, this is mobility. So you're holding only a couple seconds and come back up. Try to keep your hips facing square as that knee stays out. If you need to hold your knee, that's fine. It might feel a little stiff on one side compared to the other. And this is just working on the hip internal rotation plus a little bit of hip flexion as well. The third exercise to really work on that single leg squat is to get that hip into more deep hip flexion. So what you're going to do, place one foot on a box or chair or step, and all you're going to do here is almost like a lateral lunge, but we're just working on mobility. So I want you to drop your glutes back as you come into deep hip flexion on this side and come back up. You got to get used to getting that butt back and that hip into hip flexion. Now, if you're struggling with a single leg squat, maybe you can't go down as far, stability isn't that great, mobility, balance, I always recommend holding on to something like a chair. A TRX is a great thing to use, just so you can get used to the motion of a single leg squat, even if you're not holding a weight or anything like that, it's still gonna be really beneficial. The TRX straps are great because you can hold on to them and kind of lean back into your glutes and into your heel as you come down in that squat. Perfect. All right, so when you do a single leg squat, I want you to remember to have your hips on your pelvis as you do this. Do it in front of a mirror if you can, because what I want you to look for is, what is your knee doing? Is your knee caving in or out or wobbly? But also, what is your pelvis doing? I already talked about dropping a hip down, like if your hip is stiff, but it will also drop if it's weak. So try to keep, I always have hands on pelvis because you want to make sure your hands stay level the entire time, shoulders stay over your pelvis. So it shouldn't be leaning to one side, it shouldn't be dipping or hiking one hip up. It should ideally stay completely level as you go down and up. The other mistake that I see with a single leg squat as I go through this with my one-on-one clients is that they're just bending their knee forward. This can cause knee pain because all you're doing is loading that patella, loading that quad, loading that patella tendon versus the movement pattern where you stick your butt back. So then when you stick your butt back, you're loading your glutes and your quads. So make sure that you're getting that movement pattern down. Butt goes back. Knee still goes forward a little bit, and that's that ankle dorsiflexion, but you're loading glutes and quads to go down and come back up. That's your single leg squat. Keep working on it. It might take a little bit, but you're gonna be a much better runner if you can progress into a single leg squat.